broadcasting live from the Cranbrook Institute of Science. Welcome to the Cranbrook meeting of the Warren Astronomical Society. I'm Diane Hall, your president. And as you can see, I'm not at the lectern, and there's a reason for that. So we're doing things a little differently physically tonight, but we promise it'll be a good time. So in terms of the presidential report, I'd like to thank everybody who showed up at Astronomy at the Beach. I tried to name as many of you as possible that I saw with my own eyes on Friday night. But I know that that does not encompass everybody. So we'll be extending our thanks to you over the course of the night because it was a great return to the actual beach. So thank you again. The weather on Friday night was very pleasant, at least. I think it rained a bit Saturday. Got an announcement for the good of the club. Sad news. The wife of our member, David Levy, Wendy, mentioned many a time in David's comments to us, passed away on Friday, September 23rd. David sent out a very touching obituary to various members of the astronomical community, but if you want to extend your well wishes to him, your condolences rather, hope for his well-being, you know, we've got his contact info. So quite sad. And she was, of course, an astronomer in her own right, not merely Mrs. David Levy. So it's a loss. All right. In better news, the year is grinding on. We have good news about the banquet that Bob Tremblay will share. We have good news about the calendar and that the calendars are available for sale tonight. Mark Kedzier will talk about that. And we have elections coming up next month here at Cranbrook. That means that tonight is the official night to convene the election committee, the people who handle the nominating and the election for our next slate of officers. The only rules to join the election committee are that you are a member and that you are not running for office. As I am term limited out after 3 additional years as your president, I stand to be on the committee and will happily serve to provide a transition for next year. However, if you would like to join me, please let me know at break and we will have a proper 2 to 3 person committee instead of just me. So, submissions wanted. Other than that, Bob, are you ready? Can you do it on your phone if I mute, or you want to come on over here? All right. Turn it over to Bob.
Ready. I am Bob Tremblay, your first vice president, and our speaker for the banquet, Kareem Jafar, whom Diane has met, and I have not, so I can't wait. He has agreed to be our speaker, so that is a good thing. Next month, I have for our Macomb meeting, I have Danica Remy. She is the president of the B612 Foundation. She's going to be talking about planetary defense. And I have an opening for the Cranbrook talk, the long talk, next month. I'm going to be reaching out to the Ford Club, but if anybody has a presentation they'd like to give, a long format presentation, please contact me. What else do I have? I think that's pretty much it. So if you'd like to give a presentation next year, I have a lot of openings. So passing it back to Diane.
The banquet will be, and since we just got confirmation from our speaker, the banquet will be the 5th. We are combining the banquet without food and the award ceremony with the Cranbrook meeting. So rather than having a separate event at a cultural center or banquet hall or whatever, we will be having the end of year festivities with our special speaker broadcasting here on December 5th. There's not food involved, but there will be awards and there will be a special end of year presentation and there might be music.
There might be nut-free bags of money.
Yeah, we might have nut-free bags of snacks from GFS. If we want refreshment, we have to go to the Redcoat Tavern. I will remind you all, the Redcoat now closes earlier than it used to. In order to partake of the Redcoat, one must be in your seat and have your order placed by 10:15 p.m. Therefore, it is in our best interest to do a meeting orderly and effectively and get out of there so we can enjoy the booze. We have priorities here, Gary. Okay. Over to you, Riyadh.
Thank you, Diane. Hello, everyone. Our last open house was on September 24th, and unfortunately it was cloudy, but we still had 5 of us that attended. We basically sat around and talked a little bit about the history of the club, the history of our observatory, and we had a decent discussion. Also, Jeff McLeod purchased and installed a wheel trailer jack on the W.A.S. Trailer to make it a little bit easier to attach and detach from vehicles. The next open house is on October 22nd. We hope for clear skies and hope we'll see you all then. That's all I have. Thank you. Back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Riyadh. Over to Secretary Mark Kedzier. Mark has his minutes in the WASP, excellent as usual, and will be selling calendars tonight. The price is $20 in person. It will be a $5 shipping fee in the event that we have to have them shipped to you. So it's more economical to pick them up right now, hot off the presses, at a Cranbrook meeting. And we will keep on selling them until they're all gone. Okay. Oh, I would say it's time for a treasury report, but our treasurer is AWOL, or rather he's having a good time at the Okie-Tex Star Party. We know where he is. We've been in communication. He's just not here, and he's got the checkbook in Oklahoma. You can still use PayPal if you want to join, pay for a calendar remotely, or give us a donation. We like donations. Dale Teamy, would you mind reading the treasury report since you logged into it earlier today? Dale, you there?
I don't have it at hand right now, but as it stands, we have roughly 29,000 in the banking account and several hundred in the PayPal account due to paying the, that's largely due to paying for the calendar printing and the insurance payment that we made this week, month.
Yes, so we have successfully insured Stargate for another year, which is always a major achievement and a big pain in the butt of any board. So yay, we accomplished that in record time this time around. All right, Kevin with Outreach. Come on down, Kevin.
Again, just everybody, thanks for the astronomy at the beach support. It was great. In terms of general outreach, Mark Kedzier is doing an event November 9th at the Warren Library. I know, Dale, you sent me something and I don't have it. Go ahead.
Repeat that slowly, something about November.
Oh, Mark Kedzier is doing an event at the Warren Library on November 9th. I know you sent me something that you're doing an event at the library, but I think it's in next year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Troy Public Library, right? But the date's not fixed yet. Early next year. And then we have a gentleman, his name is Jerry, is it Hops? I don't know how you say your last name. Haspatcher. He's working with the Dark Sky organization on Belle Isle. And they're having an event. Is it your opening event? Okay, well, there was an event on Friday, October 21st. He's looking for support. He's looking for anybody who could support it with a telescope if you have. He's also looking for somebody who could just kind of lead the group that's there on maybe a guide to the sky, something like that. Not really a talk, but just to kind of lead with questions about what's in the sky on that night. So I'll send this around, and if you can come, great. If not, I'll collect it after.
Thank you, Kevin. So we're very excited to have the participation of the people from the Belle Isle Dark Sky team, since a Belle Isle Star Party has been a long-term dream of many officers of the W.A.S, and to have a group of astronomers from all over the area come together and try to make this certification a reality and make the star parties a reality is fabulous. So we do recommend that you join them on October 28th. And with that, the officer reports come to an end. Do we have subgroup reports? I see some subgroup captains hanging around. I see Bill Beers with his hand up. Where's Solar Marty? Solar Marty, come on over.
We're getting back to
All right.
groups right now.
And Bill Beers from Astrophotography is coming on deck.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody out there that submitted astro photos for this year's calendar. This year's calendar came out really good. We had to change companies, and this one worked out really well for us. So we had like 25, 26 entrants to choose from, so it was kind of difficult. But thanks again for everybody that participated, and I suggest you purchase one of our calendars.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you and Dale for making a smooth transition to the new company after a long-term vendor Calyptic seems to have gone under, which kind of sad. It was fun doing business with them. But we've got a new vendor, we've got beautiful calendars, and the calendar is one of the few tangible things that we offer to members in this day and age that we no longer have mimeographed copies of the W.A.S or other physical artifacts, newsletters, physical in the news reports, but we do give you all the chance to get the calendar. So any other subgroup reports tonight? Again, Adrian is out in Oklahoma, so Astronomical League type stuff, we'll have to wait until he gets back. And realistically, you can't sign up until January anyway. I don't see any hands up, so we can go on to observing reports. We've had some good weather, we've had some bad weather, and we caught the tail end of a hurricane or two. Do we have some observing reports, gang? I do.
I have one from David Levy.
All right, sir. I don't know if you joined us earlier, but we express our sincere condolences to you on behalf of the board and the entire club, sir.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I guess you can. What I'm trying to say, for those of you who have, my wife from breast cancer.
You're fading out a little bit, David.
Okay, on September the 23rd for breast cancer. Suffered from for about 10 years, and I really. Anyway, I chose a poem which is from Shakespeare. A poem as Shakespeare wrote it is not a poem. It's so negative. Because I changed it. This is the poem I've probably read to you before, where he predicts by 4 centuries to anticipate the theory of the concept of space. But in order to make it relevant to what I'm going to read, I tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. It's in a steady pace from day to day. Over 31, the last syllable of recording, about brief cancel. Life is so much more than a walking shadow, a poor player of friends and then I heard no more. There's a tale told by an idiot, yes. It's also a tale told by a genius, full of sound and light, signifying ever so much. And I'm going to end by stealing a quotation from and the passing of his. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet Wendy, and may flights of angels sing thee. Thank you all for your good wishes. tomorrow, and I hope I'll be a little. Come back.
Thank you, sir. And again, we're extremely sorry. I saw some hands raise and drop in the last 2 minutes. Doug, did you have a report from the Northern Cross Observatory?
Sure. I was going to pop in on the solar stuff today because I happened to do some imaging on the sun today. You can hear me okay, correct?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I want to do a share here. So this was the sun today from my observatory using my 6-inch SET, and you can zoom in here and see some decent spots here coming around the edge. And some leaving around the other edge.
It says starting to share content, but we can't see your screen quite yet.
Oh, okay. Don't know why.
Don't use dial-up.
I'm on 400 megabits.
We can see it online.
What's that?
We can see it online.
Okay,
okay.
so Cranbrook needs to stop using dial-up. Gotcha.
There you go.
Computer. It's a MacBook Air. It's not built for this.
Okay. So anyways, there's a large collection on the leading edge and the trailing edge right now, and some in the middle. And I have annotated them. So there's this group here, 3112, is coming on board, and it's going to be pretty strong, probably coming as it faces us. So that's something to look for as far as possibility of aurora, etc., in the days to come. And here's a zoomed in look of 3112, and then it's 3116. So that's the solar stuff. I was at the Great Lakes Stargaze this last month, and had the opportunity to do some stuff with my shorter focal length telescopes. My 4-inch, this is M33, the Bubble Nebula with my 4-inch, along with M52. This is the same area, but with my 300 millimeter lens, so it's much wider. This is M52, is the double, and there's several other nebulas and dark nebula there. And then this is the crescent with the 300 millimeter. And then the crescent with the 4-inch. And then the North American with my 300 millimeter. This came out quite nice. This was on the partly cloudy night, so between the sucker holes, I got about an hour and a half worth of data on this one. It turned out pretty cool. And another M33 that I took. That's my observing report for this month.
Thank you, Doug from the Northern Cross. Mute. All right, Alan and Cheryl, I saw your hand up. Got an observing report for us?
No, that was just an accident, actually.
Okay, no problem. Well, I've got an observing report. Jonathan and I went up to our dark sky site in Alcona Township, south of Alpena, this past weekend. Unfortunately, we got rear-ended by another car on the way up there. Long story, but we're fine. And we got to do some lovely observing on a very windy night, way too windy for the 24-inch, even if we had it assembled. But we brought out the 8-inch and the 10-inch on Saturday, and despite the wind and some skunks that were hanging out under the cedar tree, we had a lovely, if brief, observing session. We looked at M33, which is stunning right now. We looked at Jupiter with some of the best detail I've ever seen using that 8-inch. We looked at Mars, which was over the lake, and with the Hurricane Ian winds, it looked terrible. Mars was a washout. I looked at Aldebaran and Capella because sometimes I like looking at colored stars for fun, even when they're not double stars. Double cluster was one of the best views, again, that I've ever had with that 8-inch. And Andromeda looked, the Andromeda Galaxy looked absolutely spectacular. It felt like you were seeing a three-dimensional image using a 25 millimeter eyepiece and an 8-inch factory Dob. So that was one of the best observing sessions we've had with that 10-inch, thanks to the darkness and thanks to the incredible clarity of the sky above, say, 30 degrees. I gave a presentation to the Ford Astronomical Club last month. There was a reprise of my talk on Apache Sitgreaves Observatory. And one of the Ford members asked me if that trip to Arizona had spoiled me on regular skies and regular telescopes. And I said, no. The same way that if you went to like a 3 Michelin star restaurant, you wouldn't want to eat that the rest of your life. I gotta say though, the dark skies of northern Michigan have definitely spoiled me for anywhere south of Alcona Township. It is so dark there. It's just the best skies you can get to with half a tank of gas, for my money. Anyway, closing in on 7:51. Any additional observing reports?
I have an observing report.
Yes. Identify yourself because I can't see anybody's pictures.
This is Adrian checking
Oh,
in from
Adrian.
yep, I decided I'd check in from some parts unknown in Nebraska, 177 miles outside of Kearney, where I've begun the long journey home from Okie-Tex. I did more visual than picture taking. I do have my pictures that I have to process, but I did a little more visual astronomy, reacquainting myself with all of my mounts and getting them to work and looking at some favorites. Most of what you mentioned, Diane, I had also observed, but we tried to get a little bit deeper since we were in some pretty dark skies. 4 days straight of dark skies from the start of the star party to we finally got a break because the clouds came on Tuesday and closed the sky up for a brief period.
There is such a thing as too much good weather. Sorry.
Yeah, that may have been the case more than I'll talk about right now. But yeah, we were dragging on Tuesday, but it's like we still wanted to observe, we still wanted to look. Well, one interesting thing I did look at was a small planetary nebula in the constellation of Grus, the Crane, which is a constellation that is very low on the horizon back home, but most of it appears above horizon here at Okie-Tex, or there at Okie-Tex, because I'm not there anymore. Um, a couple of other good moments. There were some people at Okie-Tex. There was an Indian family, and the kids came up to our scopes very much interested in seeing things in the night sky, and we got to do a little bit of outreach. Then we camped after Okie-Tex was over. We camped one more day at Black Mesa State Park, and the Oklahoma Astronomy Club did a view the moon outreach, and we participated in that. So it was a very rewarding trip. Um, Looking at M33, it wasn't just about looking at the galaxy, but looking for H2 regions in the galaxy using an 11-inch scope. I used a spotting scope, and the Orion Nebula still looked really, really good in that spotting scope. My cameras were out. I had a 5-inch refractor that I tried and looked at a lot of clusters, especially in Auriga, in Perseus. Um, Thought that I saw Stephan's quintet visually, but could not make out but 2 or 3 of the galaxies. My visual eyes just weren't that good, but I could see the shape of the grouping of the galaxy sitting there next to the Deerlit group. So I did go after some tougher targets. I was quite pleased to be out there, and I will share images once I get back. It'll be a couple more days yet before I'm back in Michigan, And I did share some of the images I got on Facebook for those of you that are connected to me there. So I just realized that I'm talking into this thing and all you see is an eye. Let me turn that camera off. So it was a very rewarding trip, and the trip home has started. That's it.
All right, thank you, Adrian. We have Marty raised his hand, so we have time for one more observing report before we hand things over to Jeff McLeod for the short presentation. Marty, what you got for us?
About a week ago, I looked at Jupiter and Saturn for about 4 hours. Well, actually 3 seconds out of every 30 seconds I looked at it. I was running the big job at Astronomy at the beach. Saturn on Friday night was really good because the skies were steady, a little bit of haze, and the red spot was real prominent in the early part of the evening. So I'd say that Friday night was the best for scoped it really well.
Smaller.
What?
The red spot? How small the red spot is. Yeah.
We keep thinking we're missing it, but we might be seeing it and it just doesn't stand out.
It's now become actually a red and orange. It's so small. It's round.
I think we did see that on Saturday then.
I saw a black and white image of Jupiter from like the 1800s, and the red spot was huge.
Oh yeah, it was well, you could see it with the telescopes they had in the 1700s.
1,000 kilometers longitude. I mean, well, or along the line. Now it's got to be a small fraction. Yeah, something like 1860, 1870, 4,000 kilometers.
All right, well, we're mourning the red spot. Jeff, where are you? Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
And how are you going to pull this off?
We're getting
Okay.
See if this might work. Okay. Galaxies are one of the least understood structures in astronomy. Really? Okay. Yeah, let's try this again. Stealing my thunder. Let's try this again. Galaxies are one of the least understood structures in astronomy. Really? Yeah. Wow. Simulating them is so computationally demanding that many things are still not well understood. But emulating or cheating can get us remarkably close. The density wave theory, QSDW, attempts to explain what galactic spiral arms are. Jeff will break down the theory, and in doing so, will demonstrate how well it can emulate what we observe in spiral galaxies. Jeff McLeod is a former W.A.S president, observatory chair, and a regular at outreach events, as well as behind the podium. During his time at Wayne State, was a presenter at the planetarium while getting a bachelor's in physics and another in astronomy. Jeff recently started work in the aerospace sector, simulating missiles, the rest is classified. Nowadays, most of his free time is spent working on his spaceflight simulator, which was at Astronomy at the Beach, a life-size recreation of a Gemini spacecraft you can actually fly in. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you. All right, can they hear me in the web world over there, or do I have to like really speak into the mic? Good, all right. So, like the intro states, we're cheating. Simulating is really difficult. Emulating, not so difficult. So to break that down, I turned it on. All right. Simulating is recreating all of the nuance that makes something happen. Emulating is just reproducing the outcome. Usually this is like in coding, but we're going to talk about galaxies. I'm just going to make this visually entertaining, but we are going to talk a little bit about the theory, but to be honest, it's above my pay scale. So that's one of the simulations, if I remember correctly, 100,000 stars, so 1/1,000,000th of a Milky Way right there. And that took my computer probably 15 minutes. So when I talk about computationally heavy, that's cheating. To do it for real would be impossible. So a little bit of an overview. What are we talking about? How do galaxies rotate? A little bit of a misconception. We'll square that up. That'll lead us to the winding problem. Solving that will lead us to the density wave, and then the simulations. So this is the only graphic that's not mine. I just stole this from the web. I'm talking about spiral galaxies, obviously. So this doesn't apply to ellipticals, irregulars, all that kind of stuff. We have a disk. We have stars in the disk. There's other structures to spiral galaxies, but we're really not concerned with those right now. They kind of complicate things, like the bar. The bar is really complicated, and another thing that we really don't understand how those structures form. I do have a pointer here. Disk. Okay, good. All right, so I've got 3 galaxies here. They're in rotation. They're rotating in 3 different ways, and my question to you guys is, we're going to do a poll. Who thinks that the first one is rotating the way galaxies rotate? 1, 2. Who thinks the second one is rotating the way galaxies rotate? 1. Who thinks the third one is rotating the way galaxies rotate? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, everyone says the third one is the most popular. So once they've made one lap, I'm going to add a line here, and so you can kind of see a little bit more of how they're changing from as a function of radius. So you can see the one on the left, just a solid body rotating like a record. Middle one, winding up pretty fast. Outer one, not quite so fast. And as it gets all the way around, which if I had my computer, I could speed it up. We're just going to have to wait. These are different rotation curves. The next slide will explain what a rotation curve is. It took a lot of observation to actually discern this. This is one of the first problems with galactic rotations you might have heard of. They don't seem to rotate the way we expect. So the one on the left, solid body, just like rotating a plate. No, not that one. Keplerian motion. This is what you would expect, right? Okay, stars are going around some mass just like the planets. Okay, Kepler's law applied. Let's throw that at a galaxy. It doesn't work. Why? Okay, but no, not that. Flat rotation. What is flat rotation? You can see it looks pretty similar to Keplerian, but it's not winding quite so fast. If we just look at plots, we can see as a function of your distance away from the center, flat, you go faster the farther you are from the center. Keplerian, you get a lot slower as you go farther from the center. Flat, you're all going the same speed. So those stars on the inside are moving at the same linear velocity, different angular velocities. This isn't completely true. Like, we don't see perfectly flat distributions of galaxies. They tend to get Keplerian right in the center, but then they get very flat as soon as you get a couple kiloparsecs out. So when we first discovered spiral galaxies, the idea was this is just a big tube of stars and gas and dust, and it's just going around the galaxy. But we observed this differential rotation, these flat curves. If you do that with a string of stars, you briefly get a spiral arm, but you quickly lose that spiral arm. And you start getting a very, very tightly wound spiral arm. And this thing is going to go all the way around. You'll see other structures start to appear. So there it looks like it had 7 spiral arms. It keeps going. Now it looks like it has 6. Now it looks like well, no, that's the 6. And you can see they're going from leading to trailing. Now it's a 5-arm spiral. Ever seen a 5-arm spiral? No, I don't think you have. Also, we just started with 1 band of stars. So if we filled this disk with stars, we would just be getting chaos. This is obviously a problem, okay? Spiral arms cannot be cohesive populations of stars orbiting the galaxy. Something else has to be going on. And in 1964, Lin Shu team proposed this idea of the density wave. It had actually been around a little bit longer than that. We all know what a density wave is, okay? This is a density wave. People start off in uniform traffic, but look at, boom, right there. That guy, oh, my pointer stopped working. Right in the front here, there's a density wave forming. And the traffic is slowing down. Now, the crucial thing about the density wave, it has a different velocity than the particles. So the cars are still moving, but look at where the wave is now. It's actually propagating backwards around the ring. So now it's over here, and it's going to slowly move all the way around. And if you just let these people keep driving, this density wave is just going to, it's very unlikely these people are going to be able to get out of this wave, okay? It's just going to keep going. Another example in something that looks more galactic is this fountain in Singapore. There we go. Now, galaxies are a little bit more complicated than this. All I want to point out is that you can see waves, and that those waves are moving at a different velocity than the water is moving. And this is actually a pretty cool fountain. People flip coins into it, and then they turn on all these pumps, and now this thing is sorting all those coins down into a pile that actually deposits underneath the fountain, and then they just scoop them up. So, we said Keplerian orbits don't work. So the reason that they don't work is because Keplerian orbits are two-body problems. You have a center mass, an orbiting mass, you do some math, you get a trajectory. Galaxies are huge collections of distributed mass. You can't do a Keplerian orbit like that. So what's closer to reality would be saying, let's just put a star in a uniform gravity field and pluck it. What would happen? It's going to oscillate around some sort of equilibrium point. So that's what this little ellipse is. I think this will start playing at some point. Let me know if it doesn't. I can't fast forward anymore. Okay, there it goes. So the pluck is going to determine the proportions of this ellipse, and then once you let the star go, it's going to orbit around that equilibrium point. And I'm really taking my time deciding what ellipse I want. So our star is in motion. Now let's put that star in a circular orbit around the center of the galaxy. That's going to trace out a rosette pattern, if it ever starts to go. There we go. So the actual trajectory of the star is this orange line, but we're just thinking about it as being a star that is oscillating around an equilibrium point, and that equilibrium point is in circular orbit around the galaxy. This is kind of hand-wavy, just bear with me. The whole theory is kind of hand-wavy unless you're really versed in the mathematics. So this particular one is a resonance where the oscillation around the small ellipse is the same frequency as the orbit around the center, and so we get another ellipse. And because of a lot of complex physics reasons, this is what we think is happening inside galaxies. We get this resonance. So now let's nest a bunch of ellipses together and then offset them from one another. And you'll see what emerges is something fantastically close to a two-armed spiral galaxy. Now again, what is the justification for rotating all of these ellipses? I'm going to do the hand wavy. It looks like a galaxy, that's why. Kind of have to come from a completely different direction to get this through pure math. So now let's plug this in and actually try to emulate a galaxy by, instead of doing a bunch of ellipses, doing a bunch of points. So real quick, I want to break down some reference frames. So this is in the frame of the density wave. So you are above the galaxy and you are rotating at the same frequency that the wave is propagating through the galaxy. Remember, the wave is moving at a different velocity than the stars. So little orange dot, the sun, and you can see it moving out of one spiral arm and into the next spiral arm. So every time we go around, we actually pass through all of these spiral arms. In a different reference frame, where we're actually rotating with the stars in the galaxy, you can see that's our little oscillation around the equilibrium. So we're just getting swept up in a wave, and then we fall behind. And so we put these two together, and we get both the spiral arm and the stars moving at different velocities, us going around, and we, through some careful picking of numbers, we retain a somewhat elliptical orbit with some sort of foci at the center. What would we kind of intuitively expect our orbit to be. So this is all done with a really crude graphing calculator known as Desmos. I highly recommend it for anyone that's into this kind of stuff. It's a free online calculator that you can play with. Right down there. We could go to that link, but this is just a little bit better simulation, but it's tedious to plug all this into Desmos. It's not a very powerful program. So I rewrote the code in Python so I can make thousands of stars instead of a few hundred. And then I set to work looking at images and said, hey, that looks like one of my galaxies. That's what I was going for. Yeah, that's M33 right there.
Wow.
M74. So in this program, I can obviously make a lot more stars. I can vary their star sizes. I can vary their distributions. There's some things I can do. There's some things I can't do. One of the great things that makes the density wave look so appealing is where do we see star formation in a galaxy? In the arms. And what do they say causes star formation? Collapsing gas clouds. So you have this density wave, collapsing gas clouds, forming new stars. All the blue stars are in the arms. Now I said the stars migrate away out of the arms. So why aren't they everywhere? Blue stars don't live very long. So they die before they get to the next arm. And all the older stars get to keep going around and around and around. So that matches very well with what we see. We can get 4 arms, and by introducing some kind of mismatches of the resonance, we can get asymmetric galaxies that look even a little bit closer to what we see. 2 arm. And by really breaking the code, you can even get non-spiral arms, but that was just kind of for fun. And so what I'll leave you with is a video that will make you dizzy. This is just this is like days of computer time for my poor laptop. Each frame takes me typically between 10 and 20 seconds. So 1,000 frames takes me a few hours. Did anyone notice what was wrong with the previous simulations? Good, then I won't tell you. So that's your grand spiral, and that is a leading arm. Yeah. You can get, we've observed both, and we don't know exactly what the mechanism is for why some leading, why some trailing, but the density wave will produce both. I think I read today it does favor, I think that should have stopped you. Oh, maybe it should. It should favor trailing slightly. All right, Bill, did I make the calendar this year?
Sorry.
All right, are there any actual questions? Okay, I'll start. I believe, I want to say, no, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know if there's a, yeah. It's all, well, yeah, I don't have the data. I'm working my way back to you. No, you, go ahead.
All right. How does this affect the cosmic year, as I've heard it? Oh, is about 220 million. Now, how does this affect that estimate? Does it damage that estimate of the cosmic year?
It shouldn't, because all of our data is on stellar motion. We can't actually get any data on the wave motion because the only thing that we can measure is the velocities of the stars, the radial velocities of the stars. So whatever that wave's doing, you can't tell. Because the wave is moving at a different velocity.
There's no redshift for the wave.
Right, yeah. And so it could be that the waves are almost stationary. They could be moving backwards. They could be moving forwards. It's not really known. That's where the quasi and quasi-static, there's no estimate on just how long-lived these spirals are. The idea was to explain why it really looks like spiral arms are long-lived structures. And the wind-up theory just obliterates that. There was an idea that they wind up and then they come back around and it starts to look like a spiral again. And then it's obliterated by the winding and then it comes back and it's this intermittent thing. But we just see way too many spiral arms and they seem to exist for most of the galaxy. It's not till you get to like 3 kiloparsecs where you start to get either the bulge or a bar or something that destroys the spiral. And the spiral goes almost all the way out to the edge before it's just kind of diffused into nothing. If you had any kind of winding, you would expect to see kind of just broken segments of arms everywhere, and we just don't see that.
Something like a century. Dark man.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Someone probably should. When I try to like really research up on this, except for going to scholarly articles and then just getting lost in the weeds of galaxy simulations where they are today, the idea is that the wave is an interaction between gravitational is like the main driving force, but there's also the galactic magnetic field and then the actual gas itself, the pressure from the gas. I don't know how much of this is in observations, but I read that galaxies without gas lose their spiralness, that it just kind of slowly fades away. And it might be this gas pressure that's slowing things down enough to get that initial wave process started, and then the universe just loves resonant patterns and this thing naturally tries to balance itself out by causing rings. But yeah, dark matter's got to have something to do with it, doesn't it? I mean,
I'm wondering if.
well, like I said, yeah, because this math is totally cheating. There's a little bit of gravity in the idea that like, oh, we made that ellipse based on being in a uniform gravitational field and we're just gonna oscillate around. But aside from that, all that's just points on a graph swirling around. There's that like, they're not interacting with one another. There's like nothing real about that animation. It's just a bunch of points set up to look like a galaxy. It's just crazy how much it looks like a galaxy. No, so that gets into the velocity dispersion of the galaxy. So when you look at a particular region, you measure all these different velocities. How closely are they to one another? Are they all kind of co-moving, or is everything more chaotic? And typically, it has to do with this wave stuff. There's certain velocity dispersions that basically are too fast or too varied to allow for this wave to form. And typically the bulge, the velocity dispersion in the bulge, it's way too chaotic to allow any kind of structure to form. At the same time, sometimes there's a bar there, so. Anything else? Thank you. And if you're at all interested, I can actually link you to that program and you can play around with the things and make your own galaxies. So just find me on the website.
All right, gang. We're gonna take a 15-minute break now. So just chill on the live cast and we'll drink, use the bathroom, chit chat, whatever here. Reconvene at 8:35 for our feature presentation. All right, gang, 8:34, let's filter on back. Presentation is gonna be live on stage tonight, so. Dale or somebody, can y'all see this fine? It looks good on my end. All right. All yours, Bob.
Alrighty. Okay, those interested in or interested in the natural sciences have good reason to reject the astrology, the ubiquitous daily horoscope as pablum for the masses. On the other hand, when allowing for man's relationship with the world and the vast heavens, one should be more tolerant. We are in the midst of mighty forces and the works of nature. Rational people look for order, connections, and some more security. Daily life can be hard and discouraging. Rules want to be, what, I can't read there, aggrandized. Thank you. We will not present a history of astrology, but historical development is unavoidable, especially when the relationship between astrology and astronomy. For millennia, there has been symbiosis. It is sensible to want to believe in heavenly interactions with life on Earth. Yes. G.R.A.A, presenter here,
To wit myself.
inspired by Larry F. Kalinowski, first attended a W.A.S meeting in 1962. He refused to join for years, but has been past president, and Bill Beers says he's the greatest observer in Michigan.
Absolutely. Without doubt.
And he won't deny that. Clayton Carey joined the Grand Rapids Astronomical Association with no particular interest in astronomy, but to associate with intelligent people. Results still uncertain. But the breakneck Butlerman expedition to the 2017 solar eclipse in Kentucky, early experimenter with PCs, hence the man of 100 hard drives on the floor of his bedroom. Yeah, I can relate.
He
to
has
that.
2 bedrooms. He's a man of wealth, yes.
Take it away, Gary.
No, yes, it was the Bullerman expedition. Bullerman expedition, but that's a war story for another pint. In Defense of Astrology, I will make brief, I hope, my own relationship with astrology, quote, science of astrology. My mother, as a girl, dabbled in astrology, and I remember as a young boy being told what the signs all meant and who had what characteristic and that. And there was an astrology book of sorts floating around the ramshackle family cottage we had west of Oxford. And so she made me aware that there was something about astrology. No, she did not cast horoscopes. She just thought all these 12 signs were all full of meaning, right? Well, good luck. My true interest, I believe I discussed this with Clayton, the man behind the curtain, right? My true interest in this field was piqued by this book given to me by a former Amiga in 1998, open parentheses. I have a lot of former Amigas. They have bad attitudes. So, this is a book, Dancing Naked in the Mind Field, M-I-N-D, by Carey who at that point, 1998, was a recent Nobel laureate in chemistry. And he has a chapter here devoted to astrology. I will not read anything from it, but as a scientist, he was seeing certain coincidences that he felt should be taken more seriously. This is a pretty good book. I can overlook the bare-chested holding of the surfboard, right, against the sunrise or sunset sky. I used to have a fine body myself, and I don't blame Dr. Mullis for displaying his. I'm a little less tolerant of his very swashbuckling Hunter S. Thompson style. And I do not, however, forgive the jacket picture, which shows his most recent either wife or girlfriend draped all over him, as if, well, he reminds me a little bit of Putin riding around on a horse. Okay. But this book's got a lot of good things in it and will be one of the giveaways at the banquet. Then I reported on this at a Cranbrook meeting, what was it, 7, 8, 9 years ago. How I was en route to a drinky affair at the home of G.R.A.A, founder of Optic Incorporated, and went to the Veen Observatory for some reason en route across the township. And in ascending the steps, the front steps to the Veen, there was the most magnificent sight: Castor, Pollux, and Jupiter near opposition, all clustered together. It was a truly arresting sight. Jupiter was brilliant, even next to, Jupiter, the moon, and Castor and Pollux. Jupiter was bright even next to this nearly full moon, winter moon, up there in Gemini. And I remember looking at this and thinking, in ancient days or the Neolithic times, those people would look at this and think, what is going on? This has got to have some bearing on our lives. And I recall looking at the Observer's Handbook for that night, and there was an occultation of Jupiter if one went far enough south, to the Caribbean and South America. And so crank human experience back 5, 6, 8, 10,000 years. Put yourself in their shoes, and with their rather limited knowledge of the universe. And one can be sympathetic at the ancients and the pre-ancients, by that I mean antiquity, finding some meaning in this, or looking for some meaning, or certainly ready to accept an explanation of what's going on. You know, we're all sophisticated nowadays, and we think, well, so, you know, the moon is closer than Jupiter, and Jupiter is closer than Castor and Pollux, so what possible relationship could they all have? Well, nowadays we're sitting pretty. We are sophisticated. But we have to view this relationship of the heavens with a certain amount of sympathy. One can see on the title slide how by 1771, the compilers of the Encyclopedia Britannica essentially urinated on the whole idea. And one can go into the first volume of the 4-volume Encyclopedia of Philosophy, 1967. This is the 1970s edition. A collection of books that is found in the household of the most learned of men, to wit myself. But it was a gift. I couldn't afford something like this. One looks under astrology, A-S-T-R, nothing. Nothing. Astrology is not viewed by the compilers and the many scholars who made this encyclopedia as even worth a mention. Slide. The astrology we know, I have no idea what goes on in the subcontinent or the Far East, is of Babylonian origin, although there had to be influences from India across the Indus Basin. The Babylonians were keen observers, and considering their number system, were what would be the term? Arithmetic arithmeticians. Does that come close? Something like that, right? I mean, throw it at the wall. If it sticks, it's the Lord's. If it falls, it's mine. But I don't know the word to be. They did massive arithmetic calculations pursuant to their astrology. But it was the Greek influence carried eastward. In fact, one might say suicidally eastward by Alexander and the satrapies that rose, the subdivisions of the Hellenistic Empire, and the fusion of those two scientific cultures, the arithmetic of the Babylonians and the geometry, the master geometricians of the Greeks, made the astrology that we now know, and gave it great dignity. And so, as a result, the dignity of Greek science, Greek learning, Greeks were conquered by the Romans in terms of military exploits and the expansion of the Roman state. But the Greeks captured the Romans in return intellectually. The Greek science was sophistication. Greek science was dignified speculation and prediction. And the Romans, after initial resistance to this invasion of Greek ideas, took it up with great force. Slide. Now, Posidonius, as you see, was a polymath. I don't know how self-taught, but he was the true Renaissance man of his era and was decisive in gaining favor for astrology amongst East Romans, surely an important figure in popularizing it. I keep telling them, but they don't listen. One good popularizer is worth 6 scholars. If you have a receptive audience and you have someone who knows how to deliver the material. Sagan, DeGrasse, Tyson, what the name? Yeah, right, Tyson.
Garrett Service.
Yeah, right. Oh, Huxley, masterful in the 19th century in biology and what we now would know as is ecology, although the word hadn't been invented then. Geminus wrote his Phenomena, and he covered the zodiac, celestial sphere, lunar and solar cycles, phases of the moon, lunar and solar eclipses, helical risings and settings, and the weather. Very little is known about him, and even though he was a Stoic, one scholar said he wore his Stoicism lightly. He didn't let it dominate as a controlling philosophy his speculations and his studies. And we can't be too rough on him because I've known many Christians and Jews who wear their religion lightly also. Once established, the astronomical conception of causation invaded all the sciences. Combining various sources on the subject, we had astrological implications to botany, chemistry, zoology, mineralogy, anatomy. The Stoics' doctrine of universal, quote, sympathy, linking the little world of man, which is the microcosm, with the great world of nature, the macrocosm, was illustrated by astrology. Think of it in antiquity as a form of the grand unification. Maybe the answer to everything if one just was careful enough in studying the motions and the relationships of heavenly bodies. One has to give the ancients a lot of credit for tackling something as remote as the stars above us, the moon, the planets, and they had no real knowledge, well, maybe the Earth to the sun, of how far these things were and what was going on here. Even anatomy, the response of the human organism. In fact, one scholar said that this notion of an anatomical or an astrological medicine did not disappear fully until the 17th century and did the study of anatomy, physiology, and medicine no great good. It was the Pythagoreans and the Platonists who laid emphasis on the astral origins of the human soul. This is all pre-Christian, please understand. The Epicureans saw no connection between the soul. It simply dispersed after death, and the stars. They saw no stellar or astronomical connection with the soul. But the Epicureans were rather elbowed aside because they didn't offer any final solutions to these questions, which were as important then as they are now. The Neoplatonists saw a mythical account of the soul's relation to the heavens, quote, while Aristotle and the Stoics took a more physiological line. Geminus stands between the two giants of astronomy in the Greco-Roman world. He was 1st century BCE, and he came between Hipparchus, the 2nd century BCE, and Ptolemy, the 2nd century in the time of Christ. And it is worth mentioning here that Hipparchus was probably, I ran into this in a couple of places, the greatest astronomer of the Greco-Roman world before Christ. Slide. The aforementioned Ptolemy. He was, well, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say Einstein. Einstein wasn't too much of an observer. But he was the greatest Roman astronomer, Roman era. He was actually Greek. He operated out of Alexandria. But at that time, Egypt was very much part of the Roman Empire. So it doesn't really matter whether he was a Roman, which he was not, or was of Greek extraction. And we don't know how much he traveled in the Greek world, in the Eastern Mediterranean. Astrology, as the slide said, enjoyed a vogue. It became the rage of the Roman world in the 2nd century CE. Everybody was doing it. Even the Emperor Tiberius had his birth sign stamped on coins. He was a Capricorn, by the way, but I try to overlook it. So he wrote 2 great books. Ptolemy, not Tiberius, I assure you. 2 great books, as the slide said, the Almagest and the Tetrabiblos. But it's interesting that I never heard of the Tetrabiblos before diving into this subject. And one scholar pointed out that they were meant to be joined at the hip, these 2 works. One was astronomy, or what we would think of as the science of the heavens, and Tetrabiblos was its astrological companion. And Ptolemy and those around him, fellow scholars and the laymen, viewed those books with equal interest, and I never heard of Tetrabiblos before starting this excursion into astrology. Well, The dominant ancient paradigm, well exemplified by the introductions to Ptolemy, the astronomical and astrological treatises, respectively, which were treated the two disciplines as a single predictive model enterprise of greater or less certitude, searching for regularities and significance in the motions and positions of celestial bodies. It is difficult and often artificial to separate religious understanding from scientific in antiquity. Taking Ptolemy as our guide, we have seen how an expert in both the astronomy and astrology might integrate them as a single predictive art, yielding results of greater or lesser probability and reliability. The dominant ancient thought, example, Ptolemy's two great astronomical and astrological treatises, which I've mentioned, a single predictive enterprise, a determinate astrologer. One scholar said that Ptolemy was a, quote, determined astrologer, defending the evidence of him with embarrassment and even of bad faith. Ouch. Slide. This is what he was working on in this grand unification. We see all these characteristics that he assigned to various heavenly bodies, and then we get, let's say, normative at the bottom of the slide, good versus bad influences. How moisture and femininity are joined is something I would rather not discuss. Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Mars, or Sun, Jupiter, Mars, masculine, of course. That I understand. I have it in excess. Mercury, hermaphrodite. In other words, can be dry and moist. And there was great respect for Mercury in antiquity because I think it was so difficult to see. One time in the evening sky, one time in the morning sky. And when Mercury was isolated as an element, this sort of, it wasn't a liquid, it wasn't a solid. That's why it was called Mercury, quicksilver, right? All right. The moon waxes and wanes, different heat and moisture, and that's something we can see changing on the face of a planetary body, even with the naked eye. So we are now, he is rare amongst astrologers in his efforts to find these unifications. Seeing the sun related to gold on Earth, all right? Mercury, quicksilver, solid and liquid, late discovery. Venus, copper, maybe because Venus so often appears yellowish because she's so close to the horizons. Jupiter, electrum. Never heard of electrum, an ally of sorts. I don't understand the relationship of Jupiter with electrum, but then I'm not a 1st or 2nd century CE astrologer. The sun gold, obviously the moon silver. Even the great Ptolemy is not exempt from Bush-Leclerc, 1899. Bush-Leclerc wrote a history of astrology in 1899. I do not intend, this is the French author, this is not my author. I do not intend to force my way any further into the maze of exceptions, adjustments, and alternate procedures which Ptolemy accumulates with the detached air of a man who seems to want to render the problem insoluble rather than to teach the meanings of solving it. It gets a little rough here. There has been much difference of opinion amongst astronomers as to the merits of Ptolemy. This comes out of Arthur Berry's A Short History of Astronomy, published 1898, one of the commendable Dover reprints of the 1950s and 60s. I bought this book in 1964 thinking I was going to read it cover to cover, and I probably got 3 chapters in, because reading this was like work. And I have, well, I still have an aversion to work, but in 1964, it was a pathology. So, modern criticism. There has been much difference of opinion among astronomers as to the merits of Ptolemy. Modern criticism has made it clear, a fact which indeed he never conceals, that his work is to a large extent based on that of Hipparchus, and that his observations, if not actually fictitious, were at any rate, in most cases, poor. The history of Greek astronomy practically ceases with Ptolemy. Well, that's rather rough on old Ptolemy, especially considering that the best opinion is that he was the greatest astronomer in the Roman Empire in what? The first 3 or 4 centuries AD or CE. You can see that he does not lack his critics. And how, I'm not going to wade through tetrabiblos in English, much less the classical Greek, to understand the logic between gold, silver, electrum, lead, copper, and how Venus and the moon are moisture and feminine. It reminds me of an old dance hall song. You should see me dance the polka. You should watch me cover the ground. Slide. Enter Manilius. And one wonders, now I don't know what constitutes a treatise. I find it a little difficult, but I'm in no position to argue with some of these dons and scholars and professors. I don't know about this Astronomicon, which is the oldest treatise on astronomy. What constitutes a treatise? I just don't know. A grand unification? Something that covers all the ground and pulls out all extant knowledge? I don't know. Because it seems as if the ancients were working pretty hard on this, but their work isn't apparently called a treatise. First century CE. A genius, and if he wasn't a genius, he was certainly energetic, writing 5 books, 4 about astrology, which gives one an idea of how important astrology was in the Roman world. This sphere of Marcus Manilius was composed into a poem by Sir Edward Shelburne, and I think he got his knighthood because he did all the scholarly work on the efforts and the writings of Manilius. Always, Manilius says, always we have need of Zeus, for we are all his offspring, and he in his kindness unto men giveth favorable signs and waketh the people to work, reminding them of livelihood. He tells what time the soil is best for the labor of the ox and for the mattock, and what time the seasons are favorable for the planting of trees and the casting all manner of seeds. This is true worship. It's a form of love. And it's inspired by the heavenly bodies. How many of us, well, maybe not everybody, has had similar feelings, but is less articulate. Besides, a scholar says of Manilius, besides exhibiting great virtuosity in rendering math, tables, and diagrams in verse form, the poet writes with some passion about his Stoic belief. In spite of its undoubted elegance, its Astronomica is a, quote, difficult work. So he's writing a lot of this in verse, as well as doing the mathematics in Roman numerals. I can't imagine what that was like. It would take a mathematician or a historian of mathematics to tease out what he was able to do with the instruments of math in his day. And this is from the sphere of Marcus Millennius. Such were the men who first could apprehend that human fates on wandering stars depend. They to each time applied its own events, and by long toil observed the accidents of many ages, birthdays, lives, what power of fortune governed each successive hour, and what great changes the least motions cause. Thus, when heaven's various face, the stars by laws of fate returning to their ordered course, was fully known, and each sign's proper force, which through long essay and various speculation learned from afar the tacit laws of every star. Well, slide. The early church was not kind to astrology. In fact, at various times and in various, let's say, imperial periods, or the influence of what prelate or another, at various times, I'm thinking of early 5th century, it practically amounted to a pogrom, a form of Lysenkoism, only written in the Eastern Roman Empire. I can't remember whether he was a prelate or whether he was an imperial official. Was it 409 AD? Who ordered all astrologers to burn their books in the presence of a bishop. Good part of this problem is that the church correctly assessed the situation, that astrology was competing or could compete with Christianity. And we can't have that. Like what the difference between the Trotskyites and the Stalinists, right? They cannot exist in the same borders or in the same ideological universe. But fortunately or unfortunately, maybe in a sense, in terms of intellectual history, unfortunately, that astrology was so rooted in the Greco-Roman world, so much a part of the culture, the conversation, the whole view of the universe and of man, church never could quite root it out, and so formed an uneasy accommodation with astrology. I'm not saying that the early church absorbed it or sold its soul, pardon the pun, to astrology to get along with the masses or even some of the ruling classes, but the visceral hatred of astrology did not last very long, and so astrology went underground for a while and reemerged. In the old Western Empire, the intellectual development of the new culture was so heavily influenced by the church, or if you prefer, Roman Catholicism, that astrology was extinguished, essentially, and there was not another astrological work produced until I think was the 12th century. And now we have, as I say, the medieval accommodation. And one of the great minds of the well, let's say the last 2,000 years, St. Thomas. As you can see in Summa Theologica, Aquinas was simply accepting that part of astrology which seemed to have some scientific value, far closer to astronomy than that of the occult. Now, that commentator was a Dr. or a Mr. Armstrong. He has a website on Aquinas. And in reading through his vast studies, one has to be impressed not only with Scholar Armstrong, but with St. Thomas, what he was able to produce in one, well, he didn't die that young. And keeping in mind that when St. Thomas was at university, his nickname was the Dumb Ox by his drinking buddies, because he talked slowly, he thought slowly, and probably was a bit more than a bit phlegmatic. But I guess when the wheels are going around real fast, you don't have time for a good racquetball game. From Article 3 of Summa Theologica, quote, "Now the heavenly bodies are of all bodies the most immovable, for they are not moved save locally. Therefore the movements of bodies here below, which are various and multiform, must be referred to the movement of the heavenly bodies as to their cause." Now, you heard my emphasis on Armstrong's occult. He was responding to a correspondent who is looking for guidance as to St. Thomas's views on astrology. Occult is a little hard on astrology, in my opinion. It almost sounds like a propaganda term. In other words, oh, that's all abracadabra, or it's all what, tea leaf reading, or the sacrifices of virgins by the full moon, so therefore it can't be any good. I am not an astrologer. I have no great love for astrology, but this strikes me as a smear. It's unjustified. From Article 4, "It must be observed, however, that indirectly and accidentally the impressions of heavenly bodies can reach the intellect and will. For as much, namely, as both intellect and will receive something from the inferior powers which are affixed to the corporeal organs, as in the viscera. But the impressions of the heavenly bodies have less influence on the will, which is the proximate cause of human actions, than on the intellect." Interesting, this dichotomy between will and intellect. In the second place, acts of the free will, which is the faculty of will and reason, escape the causality of the heavenly bodies, for the intellect or reason is not a body nor the act of a bodily organ, and consequently neither is the will. Wherefore, it is impossible for heavenly bodies to make direct impression on the intellect and will. Now, I am not, and never will become, an Aquinas scholar, but I see a contradiction here. Now, it would probably take a lot of background study to make sense of these two passages which I have read. On the other hand, if one were to apply the observation of stars in order to foreknow advanced knowledge, all right, those future things which are caused by heavenly bodies, for instance, drought or rain and so forth. It will be neither an unlawful nor a superstitious divination. So if you're looking for guidance as to what to plant when, that's all right. If you're looking, if you're trying to find the influence of heavenly bodies on your intellect, your powers of reason, your will, you're off the rails. That's the way I take it. And then Armstrong says this, the scholar, all that St. Thomas really grants here is some influence of the stars and planets on man, insofar as this is explained in terms of physical causation. Quote, that doesn't involve the occult. Slide. We've rattled off here all the great achievements of these two scientists. There was a synergy between them. Kepler's much the younger man, who was able to use the excellent observations of the grand observer. Bill, he was the first greatest observer in Northern Europe. Just like I am the first greatest observer in Michigan. Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. You should have seen me this morning freezing my tuchus. Anyway, these are giants. These are giants of the late Renaissance. And both of them had a considerable sympathy for astrology. Even Tycho, of course, the master of the art of the two of them was Kepler. Kepler cast many horoscopes. He just wasn't, a planetary mechanics man and studying the orbit of Mars. And it was Tycho who showed through his observations, triangulation, that comets were not part of the atmosphere. So you're thinking, well, how do these comets fit into the solar system? All right, anyway, moving on. He cast many horoscopes. It is still possible to be moved by the spectacle of Kepler's excusing himself from the labor of casting horoscopes so he could do astronomy. Probably had to earn a living. And there are people of means who were certainly willing to pay. Kepler did a great deal of astrology. He viewed it as important to his work. The conviction that to solve astronomical problems was to enter into the very mind of the creator. I'm not quoting Kepler, I'm quoting a scholar of Kepler. I'm going to read this again. How many natural scientists have thought this very thing? To be a scientist could also be a man of faith. The conviction that to solve astronomical problems was to enter the very mind of the Creator and discover truths which must serve both to unite all mankind and to raise the individual above his selfish concerns. However, this 19th century historian of science, and the 19th century was the triumph of rationalism, chooses not to mention that too much in his big chapter on Kepler. Chapter end, page 197. There are few astronomers about whose merits such different opinions have been held as Kepler. Did I read that right? There are few astronomers, and anyway, there's a lot of controversy about Kepler amongst historians of science. Lots of writings. Now, this is Barry. Barry cannot ignore Kepler's astrological work. But the end of the chapter is a rather long paragraph. I'm not going to read the whole bloody thing. but it shows what he thinks, Barry, about astrology. Kepler's writings are encumbered with masses of wild speculation, of mystic and occult fantasies. Get the word occult, right? The big middle finger. On astrology, weather prophecies, and the like, which are not only worthless from the standpoint of modern astronomy, but which, unlike many erroneous or imperfect speculations, in no way points toward the direction in which science was next to make progress. In other words, astrology was a bag on the foot of astronomy. Hence, as one reads chapter after chapter without a lucid, much less a correct idea, it is impossible to refrain from regrets that the intelligence of Kepler should have been so wasted. But it must not be forgotten that such accidents have a habit of happening only to great men, and that if Kepler loved to give reins to his imagination, he was equally impressed with the necessity of scrupulously comparing speculative results with the observed facts. If Kepler, this is the haymaker, if Kepler had burnt 3/4 of what he printed, we should have in all probability formed a higher opinion of his intellectual grasp and sobriety of judgment. Ouch. The ouch is mine. The same thing, I don't know if I'm going to be repeating myself too awfully much, but this book with 2 indices in it, one name index, the other subject index. This book, The Definitive Short History of Astronomy at the end of the 19th century, mentions the Almagest of Ptolemy, and you can't find tetrabiblos in the index. You can even page through the chapter on Ptolemy, and Barry edits it out. It's like Stalinist history. And I know that Barry, as a historian of science, did not want to encumber the tremendous progress the physical sciences made in the 19th century. And a man like him, at the end of the 19th century, looking back 100 years, would rightfully be impressed by scientific and the advance of knowledge. And he wasn't going to crap it up with a lot of astrology. But it's not honest. Not even mentioning tetrabiblos. 10 Hail Marys should straighten him out. Slide. And so we have the decline and the fall. One read at the title slide, this is in the Encyclopedia Britannica, how the compilers, the editors, just brushed astrology aside as being this worthless thing. 1771 was the first edition. And so, as the New Catholic Encyclopedia pointed out, that the invention of the telescope, that's the second edition, the invention of the telescope KO'd astrology. This is what the opinion of the New Catholic Encyclopedia on the subject of astrology. They do have an entry. It's not like the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And these excellent gentlemen came along, like, well, remember that old television program I never watched, the A-Team? All right. And astrology buckled and fell on its face and got stomped. And we must be honest, Christianity took a few lumps too. But in the age of reason, in the Enlightenment, astrology was looked upon as something that, well, only rustics and mentally retarded would ever take seriously. That we have to use logic, we have to use reason and empirical testing, and astrology did not fit. Is Swift up there? Yes. Right. Okay, one of the sources was my 1939 edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, and the article on astrology there, and it was a big article. I did just brush it off, or not like bury, just forget to put it in. Pointed out, no, they didn't forget, but anyway, he called Swift's satirical piece, it was a political attack on a Whig opponent. This prediction for the year 1709, it was a beautiful satire, as only Swift could produce, and held up astrology to such ridicule that no learned person would ever think of citing an astrological source or even presenting events in an astrological context. Schiller, this is about 1800. Yes, right. This came out of the Encyclopedia Britannica. I think I have the only extant 1939 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica outside a library, right? Do I look proud? Anyway, Schiller is about 1800. Schiller was writing a play. I think it was, he was writing a play on some older tale or some novel of some kind. And it called for an astrologer to be on stage in a scene. Schiller thought, oh no, I'm Schiller, right? Hey, I don't want this part in the play. I don't want this character screwing up serious drama. So he actually went upstairs, not to God. He asked Goethe. And Goethe said, yeah, I can understand your hesitation, but it is part of the story, so you really got to do it. And so Schiller went with that opinion. One did not lightly brush off Goethe, even as a good friend. That was the state of astrology by the end of the 18th century. Nobody wanted it on his resume. And as I say, the spirit of the time, in the 18th century, Voltaire, he was viewed as the equivalent of Timothy Leary in terms of destroying our culture. And Leeuwenhoek, they were good old-fashioned lab bench scientists. Linnaeus out there picking plants in the field. Descartes, and with Cartesian philosophy, Locke and Hobbes, well, all right, and Kant. Kant wrote formulated a theory of solar system formation, a polymath in his own way. Slide. All right. Now, since we're in this Institute of Science and we've assembled most of the finest minds east of the state capitol, it would be easy to say, voila, or vide, we have shown that astrology is rubbish. Those who even think in such terms are a pack of fools, and I don't think that's fair, considering the place that astrology had in the intellectual development, or even in certain ways, the fiber of ancient societies. Astrology made its contribution because people are looking for reasons for things. Things just don't, well, according at least to our Western mind, things just shouldn't happen. We shouldn't live in a universe of chaos and randomness. That there is a connection between the natural world, be it the stars, and what we do here on Earth, or what we should be doing, or we have to be careful about doing. This is perfectly reasonable, like looking at the fantastic moon and Jupiter and Castor and Pollux standing on the steps of the Veen Observatory, thinking, well, what if you were, you know, a Huron or an Algonquin or an Ottawa, looking at this and thinking, this got to mean something. I mean, these are magnificent objects. It just can't exist in a vacuum or as a disembodied phenomenon. So, Beck, one of the scholars of astrology we consulted, Clayton found two excellent works on astrology as scientific historical development, not as how to cast a horoscope, none of that. In fact, we made a considerable effort to contact a certain professor emeritus at the Department of Philosophy, University of California, Anthony A. Long, who is part of the philosophy department, and he wrote some seminal work in 1982, and we tried to get our hands on it. I even called out there looking for him, but he's emeritus, he's retired, and he's British by extraction. Who knows where he is? But he wrote apparently a important treatise on astrology, and he's doing this as a college professor. So, Beck, ancient astrology, I contend, retains value as an imaginative structure in which astrologically constructed heavens function as a sort of template imposed on terrestrial and human affairs in order to discern the structure and meaning of the here and now. The planets in the old days were gods, or else the living instruments of gods. Planetary motions are purposeful, not the mere drifting of inanimate objects from one place to another. And this is significant to man. Most important, from an astrological perspective, are the manifest causal effects of the sun and moon on life on Earth, the sun, which is the ultimate source of light and heat, and the cycle of the seasons. The moon influences the tides and women. Phases furnish the most dramatic of measures of time. Arguing from the undeniable effects of the luminaries, the astrologers, by analogy, postulated causal agencies for the other 5 planets, and he cites Ptolemy and Tetrabiblos. Conclusion. Astrology could not have developed unaided by mathematical astronomy. There was a strong early relationship, but the Greeks as geometers, the Babylonians as arithmeticians. Out comes in a natal horoscope. One must know the positions of the stars and planets relative to one another and to the local horizon. It's like celestial mechanics. The history of science, precisely because of its remit, is the historic development of the scientific method and mentality, quite properly treats ancient astrology. The dichotomizing paradigm of the history of science, astronomy good, astrology bad, has hampered the study of astrology as a historical or what I could say social psychology phenomenon. The mentality behind this astrological nonsense was by no means unsubtle and unsophisticated. We can appreciate how Greek astronomy was an expression, a regrettable expression, if you will, of the astronomy of its times. Astrology's error lay more in its false assumptions about celestial cause and terrestrial effect than in any failure to comprehend or manipulate the basic positional astronomy required. The denigration, as Professor Beck said, the denigration of astrology is, quote, insidious. And he is not an astrologer. He's a historian and a philosopher. There is some warrant in the ancient data for extending the working definition of astrology to include the search for metaphysical and theological meaning in the stars. Much of the data lies in astral symbolism within religious contexts. So to study astrology is in good part the study of the understanding of man with the gods, or come medieval times with God. And this is not what you read in the newspapers. So we have developed a new respect. How could we fail for astrology, at least historically and psychologically? I'm sure there are whole paper sessions, books written on the subject of the psychology of religion. We even made a doomed excursion into Emile Durkheim, and well, it was hopeless. We do not have the time, and we do not have the intellectual background for the psychology of religion to see parallels here. But we've gone from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which doesn't even deign to mention the subject, to Carey B. Mullis, who through several coincidences found himself, at least as a Nobel laureate, willing to consider some possible, directions for research, mathematical studies, like statistical studies. Whoever wants this book, come to banquet, is welcome to it. It will go to the banquet, I hope, through the good offices of William B. Beers. And normally we would say, well, fire away with your questions. But I don't know how competent we are to answer them. So thank you.
Looks like we've got a couple of questions anyway. Let's try Ken first.
Oh, Ken, yeah.
All right. First of all, Gary, spectacular. Great presentation.
De nada, grazie.
Absolutely. My thought has always been, and to help me confirm it, that astrology is the reason we have astronomy today, pretty much because old astronomers were paid by the royalty, tell them when to plant their plants and such. And it is, and to mean it, really doesn't, it had great value. Still to this day, puts the people in the sky with like.
Well, you said a lot of things in one sentence. And I'm sure I speak for you too, that if people are going to put their eyes on the sky, it should be on something more substantial than on the daily horoscope in the newspaper. Agreed. Right? Right. That's a bad path to take because, oh, what's going on up there? Well, hell, I mean, am I going to get a date for the prom? All right. This is, important business. But I used to know, I better not go into names. I used to know a woman who cast horoscopes, and she wanted to cast one for me. I politely declined. For one thing, they're a lot of work. Sure. And this was pre-home computer, which, all right. So, all right, I think it is wrong for us. Anybody who's going to ignore like half of a scientist's work because like Barry does, it's Stalinist history. It's not honest. So way back there.
You go first and then we'll take Bill.
I never read Campbell. No,
looked at it
you, well, yeah,
to answer the question.
oh.
It was one of the books I liked.
Yeah, he did, Clayton did a lot of, groundwork for this, pulling out sources. But, you know, I'm not that well educated, and I've never read a word of Campbell. And could you maybe, how are we doing for time? Could you expand this a little?
We've got the time, but you'll need to project. They can't hear you or come down to the front.
Yeah, hey, yeah, look at this magnificent desk with these great, yes, we can't hear you.
No, I mean, we're broadcasting on my laptop to an audience on the web, so they can't hear you from the back of the room.
Gary can repeat the question.
Why don't you just
Right,
repeat the question,
yeah.
Gary?
That's the oversoul, right? All right, I think, I don't know the German. Yes. Say again? The 100 Monkeys, no.
It's the monkeys with the typewriters, I think.
Oh, that, oh, yeah, they'll produce Shakespeare if you wait long enough, yeah. Oh,
There are monkeys on the island all washing off their potatoes. Somehow or another, potatoes. It somehow.
well, all right, you know more about, Campbell and Jung than I ever will, you know, and I hate to take them on in a fair fight. But, but the oversoul, I would think that it is possible for independent groups of people to discover things independently, be it theoretical knowledge or even a way of doing things.
You pile up stones, you're gonna get a pyramid, because a pyramid stays put.
I'm gonna bring it to an end because, Bill,
Bill has a
because,
question.
look, I don't think what you're describing, I can't remember the German that Jung came up with, the oversoul. Anybody know?
Isn't it Ursil?
What? No. No, anyway,
It's not archetype.
I don't think that this Jungian theory or construction or project, whatever, has too much to do with this. That doesn't negate his point. I'm not negating his point, but it doesn't have a hell of a lot to do with this, which shows that you have a fertile intellect, that you can create, or you see connections here, which I don't, because you know about those two authors and I don't. Bill, yeah.
It sounds like from your presentation that Kepler was like the founder of astrology. Would you have any idea what time frame or who came up with the 12 signs of the zodiac when that came around, the constellations through the sun, which derived the zodiac calendar. Who came up with that idea?
That was the Babylonians.
Okay,
Oh, yeah,
so that goes way back before Kepler?
way bloody back,
Yeah.
right? And what,
Our version is
viable
Roman.
Babylonian astronomy, or is Babylonian, goes back, what, 2,500 years or something more than that, right? And I think the first civilizations in in the Tigris-Euphrates area were 5,000 BC. Now, that's not saying that those people 5,000 BC came up with an astrology.
Yeah.
But the 12 signs were Babylonian.
Okay.
And then the Greeks adopted it because, well, they found it interesting. And besides, we look at the constellations on the zodiac, and you can see roughly season. I mean, Aries isn't too much to write home about. Sorry, you Aryan people. But I could think of a better address to be born under than Aries. Have I made
resent
any?
that.
Huh?
I resent that.
I thought you would, because I know that you were part of
That was by design.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Dr. Dale, last question of the night.
No, please, we have somebody here. Well, he's got Mars. Mars is drying and burning, right? And Mars is also in the next string. Mars is masculine along with the sun and Jupiter.
I don't think you gave what metal it was associated with.
All right, you're right. I don't see a metal here for Mars. That might, it's an oversight.
But I don't think you ever sent it to me here.
I did.
I don't think.
I missed it, or I failed to put it in.
There have to be seven because basically. Sure.
Well, well, let's see if we can do this.
This thing is the
Sun,
everything we do, all of these cycles.
Mars, Jupiter, Saturn.
Yeah.
That's 8. Okay, but the sun is not a wanderer. Sun's always.
No, but it's.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got the 5 planets, the sun and the moon.
Yeah,
Those are the days.
the moon is a wanderer.
All right,
Wait, we had.
Dr. Dale.
I have 2 comments. The first is very brief. I thought it was a bit anomalous that can you put up the picture of Ptolemy, please?
Oh. Here he is.
I turned everything off.
This, right?
The batteries.
Okay, that's okay.
Right.
The picture of Ptolemy shows him holding some instrument, and
Cross staff.
the scale is marked off in Arabic numerals.
That's a
That's a medieval, I'm sure Ptolemy did not look anything like that. Unless there were statues.
No, that whole iconography is way post-Roman times.
But no, the ancient Greeks had something roughly similar to Roman numerals. They were using Greek letters as numbers. And it was phenomenal, the calculations they did without Arabic
But
numbers.
it's Clayton's fault.
Anyhow, can somebody turn that off?
Yes. Oh, sweet, I'm sorry.
So my other comment, which has a little more depth to it, is I can understand ancient people looking for meaning in the stars. I'm not into astrology, but I get it that they were looking for meaning, for something higher than just the mundane stuff. And I noticed you had on your last slide something about the rampant triumphalism of science.
That's right. The rampant
Yeah.
rampant triumphalism of science.
Yeah. My comment is this. I know a little about science, right? I'm kind of a scientist. And I think we all greatly appreciate, and rightly so, the benefits of science. It's done a lot for us. But science ultimately talks about what I'll use the term mechanical level of meaning. It doesn't tell us why the physical laws are what they are. It does not tell us even why there are physical laws.
We haven't got that far.
Well, but science doesn't even ask that question. It's not the kind of question that the scientific method does a good job of addressing.
We are. As soon as we figure out subatomics, we'll maybe figure out why the other rules work the way we do. That's why we're still looking the same as the Greeks for a unified field theory based on what we currently know.
Yeah, the unified field theory, when it's found, which I presume it will be, won't really tell us what the meaning of everything is.
That it won't be everything. I read somewhere that some preacher who was a scientist said that science could probably explain 99.9% of everything. And that'll be great, no matter how many nines there are at the end of that decimal. But what's left, that can be God, and I'm okay with that. Then for me, I'm okay with that.
Okay, that was my comment.
Science.
And
Does
thank
not
you
ask
for
why.
the presentation. I might add that in my introductory astronomy class that I teach the history of astronomy. And for that, I must teach astrology. I always ask my class, how many of you at least sometimes read your horoscope? It's typically half the class. So when I ask them why you put any confidence in horoscopes to tell truth, I find it interesting that they generally have never thought about it. I have yet to find a single student who had, even one student.
In other words, they've never questioned why they look at these daily horoscopes?
Well,
Is
the
that what-
question is, why would they expect there to be truth in them?
Oh.
Okay.
That's because they don't understand the mechanics. They think they're gonna win.
So what I tell them is, if you look at ancient astrology, which is where astrology, came from, that why would it matter where the sun was when you're born? Well, because the sun was viewed as a god who had the power to make it matter.
Zeus.
Where the sun was when you were born, okay? There's a moon god and a Saturn god and so forth. And so that's what they thought in ancient times, and the religious part of astrology seems to have been forgotten, at least by most people. And so ultimately I tell them astronomy diverged from astrology, and what you wind up with is astrology is a religion and astronomy is a science based on a scientific method. Most of them don't even think of it as a religion. It's just like, I don't know what, magic or something.
Considered a religious subject in their family or in school based upon my relationship. So it's whatever.
I think it's actually a more complex issue, particularly with the revival of some indigenous astrology and things like that, about Native American activists. And there's been a resurgence in it, but I don't think it's people reading the newspaper, the physical newspaper so much anymore as it is picking and choosing between some different belief systems. Like I have some family members who take retrograde of Mercury very, very, very seriously. They've probably never seen it in a telescope, but Mercury being retrograde is, and coming out of it yesterday apparently, is like, how's the weather doing?
Why do they have that view?
I don't want to go into that on a live mic.
Okay, maybe afterwards.
Whatever it is.
First, but also, you know, I've encountered Native American activists for whom it's cultural. They feel they're reclaiming their culture from the white guy's science.
Yeah,
Okay.
but buried in that culture are their original reasons. It's like
trying to
labeling,
get back to that.
it's like labeling Middle Eastern culture a culture and ignoring the fact that Islam is an important part of it, right? I mean, I'll bet there are religious underpinnings to that culture.
Oh, yes, but the whole religious system works very differently than, say, Christianity. I mean, it's just a different approach to you know, you're not dealing with embodied gods in planets like you would be in the Greek system. You're dealing with a different kind of spirit structure, different spiritual way of looking at the world.
But it's a different unified field theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me. I wasn't born into that.
I mean, I said the other day to Gary that Christianity is a unified field theory. It covers absolutely everything.
If you want to see the universe rendered beautifully, read Dante.
The devil, you're halfway there.
Ask Aquinas. By the way, gotta give credit where it's due.
If you're driving, if you're driving and it's a new moon or a full moon, you feel more worried about traffic.
I love the full moon because it lights up the dark roads.
The traffic's gonna be more crazy.
All right.
All right, we have one last question, and then we have to shut down and leave. We only have this room until 10, and it's too late to go to the Red Coat, so if you're heading there, you're probably not gonna be able to order. One question. Yes.
It's worth mentioning that Dr. Parton told a story at the last discussion group I attended that also was an inspiration for this. Right? You made your own little contribution.
All right, well, thank you.
Saturn.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you very much, Dan Harder. And if you did bring any food or drink or anything like that, do please clean it up. And we will be out of here. See you on Thursdays.